we're just going to kind of go through a quick history of um, Saint Dominic, how his kind of quick little life story, how he came to find the order of preachers, and we'll talk about some of our favorite Dominicans we've learned about so far, and then we'll kind of end with um,
What it means to be a Dominican.
yeah, what it means to be a Dominican and why we are pursuing that. So I'll let you start.
Okay, well, as you've probably heard, Saint Dominic de Guzman was born in Spain in the 12th century and did most of his ministry in the 13th century. He had a noble background, like actually several other famous Dominicans, like De las Casas. Um, his mother purportedly had a vision of a dog running with a torch
In his
right
mouth.
in his mouth,
Mm-hmm.
which was interpreted as him being doing significant missionary work, which kind of became the nickname ended up being the Hounds of the Lord or the Dogs of the Lord. Um, yeah, and he was he became a priest and was working as an oblate. I don't remember at the time, but he was
He was working as a canon.
canon,
Mm-hmm.
working as a canon, and he accompanied a bishop to France to set up a wedding proposal between two nobles, and that's when he encountered the Albigensians and some of the Waldacians and the Manichaeans and the Cathars, which were some heretical groups at the time that were living in southern France.
Mm-hmm. And just as a side note too, he came from a family that was very pious at the time. So he had an uncle that was a
Right.
priest. He had two brothers that were priests, two nephews that were priests, and all except for one actually ended up becoming part of the Anglican order of preachers later on. Um, by the time he had done that, he had gone on the trip with his bishop Diego and seen that was actually a need for mission work done, since these heretical groups were around. He kind of decided at that point that that's where he wanted to focus on. So um, with the, I guess, permission of his bishop and whatnot, he continued to do missionary work. And I always like to point out, just because um, sometimes, well, it's fun to point out that the first Dominicans, you could say, were actually women. So um, women that he had converted and that
That's
he
right.
actually set up a convent for.
And I think he was really fulfilling a need in the Catholic Church at the time. The church had become very wedded to the state, and a lot of the priests and the bishops were not very good ambassadors of the gospel and were, in some ways, kind of living, high on the hog off the people and not really being good servants and good ministers. And it sounds like there was actually a pretty critical failing as far as education and training of the clergy at the time.
Mhm.
All of those things he would end up ultimately kind of targeting and rectifying, and yeah,
Yeah,
that
and
was kind
his,
of the key to his success.
definitely, especially among the early Dominicans, the early people that he kind of brought into his inner circle. Um, he was able to find people that wanted to be a part of his mission work, that wanted to see a greater understanding and study of actually spreading the message of the gospel and kind of bringing it back to the word, which, again, kind of goes back to that vision that his mom had with the torch in the dog's mouth, spreading the word of God, spreading the gospel throughout everywhere. And he was really well set up, actually, to begin the Anglican order of preachers, just because um, I'm going to say it wrong, canonry was already following the rule of St. Augustine, and he had already kind of devoted himself a little bit to mission work, to contemplative prayer. He himself was very disciplined in that regard. So being able to find others um, was really great for him at the time, and was also great because he cared about them actually earning an education and really studying and being well versed in what they were about to go spread their message to everyone.
And the kind of the principles that they founded the order on ended up being kind of fortuitous, because I didn't realize until pretty recently that just how big of a drain on a lot of local resources and like church resources all those monasteries and convents and some of those other religious orders were. So the fact that they were kind of pledged to mendicancy, like poverty, made it more likely that they would probably be able to be formed as an order, and it allowed them to go into some place they might not have been otherwise, just because of the drain that some of those institutions had on the resources. And then it also had the benefit of, being probably better ambassadors of, you know, Christ's gospel when you're, really kind of committed to a life of poverty like that. So that and the kind of the democratic nature of the order was established from the very beginning. And within a few years of the establishment of the order, he was already sending uh, members out to the kind of the leading universities at the time. So those were kind of
Paris.
the big
Yeah.
pillars: mendicancy, democracy, and then really, treating academic study as like a kind of martyrdom and a kind of monasticism in and of itself,
Hmm.
which made them better preachers.
Definitely. Um, I guess outside of that, he did eventually obviously get permission from the Pope at the time to formally set up the Anglican Order of Preachers, which had kind of taken him a little bit of time. It wasn't an easy process for him. He had started it with the previous Pope and then had to continue, I guess you could say, applying for that process with the Pope that preceded. Um, I think by the time he actually got approval and formally started it, he had 16 friars ready to send out to different parts of Europe, as Nick said, to study and to spread the gospel there. Um, as Nick also said, one of the great things about the order that continues to this day is just it was democratic in that everyone had a voice. So it didn't matter that he was the founder, um, who they elected master of the order. It didn't matter who at the time was in charge. You could say everyone had a voice, and that's something that to this day continues in the Dominicans, whether it's the Catholic order or whether it's the Anglican order, which is something that I think is just a very good thing to point out. It has made it really successful in the way that they've been able to continue their mission and spreading the gospel throughout the world.
And the order grew pretty rapidly. Dominic definitely left his mark on the, like, in his personality on the nature of the order. And it continued to grow and be pretty successful until probably the next, big personality that kind of shaped the course of the Dominicans was Thomas Aquinas,
Mm-hmm.
who was a famous Dominican theologian and teacher. Um, and a lot of his thought, he wrote something insane. Like he has 1,000,000 words worth of material by the end of his life, just incredibly like prodigious, like very productive. And he shaped a lot of the character of the order. And that's when we see the real wedding of not just a pursuit of theology, but pursuit of education in the natural sciences and the other fields as well, as all kind of contributing to, being a better missionary, a better uh, minister, better Dominican.
Yeah, it really rounded out every. It really rounded out the order in that the people who continued to join, and some of the famous Dominicans will mention, each had really big strengths in different areas, and it wasn't always just theology. I think when we think of religious orders, we are really stuck right now on this thought of just monks and nuns, and they're living in their convent, and they're not necessarily getting outside of that. And while that's true to this day, there's still um, definitely contemplative nuns and friars and monks. There's also been a long history of artists and musicians and scientists who have been able to continue preaching the gospel of Christ while also showing people, that this is also something important. This is a way we can actually reach more people and I guess just get out there so that people aren't too afraid of, we're not just trying to preach something to you. We want to connect with you on a deeper level than just trying to, say you should follow the gospel. They really live it out in their own ways.
And I think fortunately, it kind of addresses one of the weaknesses we've seen a lot probably in the 20th and 21st century, at least in American Christianity, is oftentimes uh, our expression of Christianity in America can be kind of anti-intellectual, and a lot of people see it as being very hard to harmonize an understanding of the gospel with an understanding of the natural sciences and the physical sciences and the social sciences. And it's definitely, you see this in the Dominicans, that it's definitely very possible to harmonize those two things. And it's kind of interesting that also on the other side, though, they actually have some fairly notable mystics and contemplatives that were a part of the order. And there's a pretty strong trend, really, that kind of goes all the way back to Dominic himself of, contemplative study in addition. So there's kind of both sides of the coin, which really adapts well to, the Anglican Episcopalian tradition, where, both kind of the spiritual aspect and the, reason both kind of have their part to play in shaping our adult, mature faith.
Mm-hmm.
That was
And that
one
is
of the things that I had not, I hadn't quite. Can you speak a little bit more about the contemplative side of? I know you got your presentation, and I'm just screwing it up, and so.
no, you're not.
But can you? That was one of the aspects of it that I was really fascinated about, but I didn't get to read that much about. So I was wondering if you could speak to the contemplative side a little more.
Yeah, I mean, probably the most famous one is kind of Catherine, even though she wasn't, Catherine of Siena, obviously, and her confessor, which I don't remember his name right now, was a Dominican. Um, and she obviously had some pretty profound mystical and contemplative experiences. But I think, it even kind of sounds like there's elements in Dominic's life himself, when they talk about how he prays. Yeah, the 9 ways of, yeah, exactly, the 9 ways of prayer.
Something else too, I think that we actually, while there is a lot of examples of that in the past, I think that that's something people are embracing even more now in modern times. Some of the Dominicans that we've read about lately, there's 2 Dominican nuns out of the Ukraine, I believe.
Yeah, that's right.
Eastern Europe, who we're talking about how just socio-political things there kind of drove them to a more contemplative life and seeking out living with other nuns, and how being able to be there in front of the Eucharist and to pray and to delve completely into a world of, I guess, just finding a more spiritual aspect of the gospel was very fulfilling for them. I think it's something that's hard to speak of today just because we don't really learn about it. We don't have a good understanding of it. It's not something churches speak
And
to anymore.
both of them were operating in former East Bloc countries that were, I don't remember either their names right now, that were still very secular, and there were times where it wasn't legal and wasn't safe and people weren't receptive to any kind of traditional evangelism. And we saw some of that too with some of the Dominicans that lived in Egypt and in Iraq. So they're just kind of by necessity, the only avenue they really had available to them was kind of modeling a life and engaging in the contemplative life, because some of the more active, teaching roles weren't even available just because of the, conditions that they lived in. It either wasn't safe or it was explicitly illegal in several of those cases.
Mm-hmm.
So, and so you don't get the sense that those who were engaging in a contemplative life were trying to avoid the intellectual rigor of the Dominicans, but it was more, okay. I was
You know,
just curious on that one. I didn't get to
I think that
research
it
it as
can
much.
actually probably go maybe both ways. I think a lot of it depends on the resources that they have, because there are some who are living the more I cannot say that word for some reason. There's some that are living that life purely because, like for instance, with the ones in Eastern Europe, they don't have resources. They don't have any other way to engage with the gospel or with Christ or with any of that, except through contemplation and prayer. And that's kind of how they have to dedicate their life, because it would put them in harm's way to speak out openly.
and I think from what we've read in the history, is it sounded like, even though education was very important in the early, like, 13th century in the order, that it probably had more of a contemplative bent until Aquinas, who kind of, well, and his predecessor too, was it Humbert? I don't remember, but his predecessor too kind of put them on a little more academic, an intellectual path, which is probably what the order is better known for and what kind of attracted me initially. But I think even in some of his writings, when they talk about what it's like to be a Dominican, it seems like they're very self-conscious that contemplation is and prayer is a big part of their, you know, path to try and attain truth. So, and it almost, I think they're almost even like self-aware that maybe that there is a little bit of a tendency within the tradition to be a little over intellectual, but there's definitely prominent people, and it seems like even like the very like stereotypical intellectuals are going out of their way to make it obvious that prayer and contemplation still matter too. At least that's what I got
And
from their writings.
not only that, I think that a lot of them who choose that life, we might not think of it, like, again, because we're just not exposed to it as much, but for some of the areas that these Dominicans live in, like the Middle East, like East Asia, Eastern Europe, places where famously Christianity or just religion in general is looked down upon, it really, living that kind of a life is exemplifying what it needs to exemplify in order to also simultaneously exemplify the gospel and what it is to live the gospel and to follow Christ and to have Christ in your life. And so I think that that's a really important connection to make when we're thinking about the contemplative life of, some of them have, that is their only option to show people what it's like. We see in the Middle East in particular, a lot of the Dominicans there now, you know, they're not trying to convert anyone. They want open dialogue, but they also want to set an example of, we're not just going to come in and try to change who you are and your tradition and who you've been, but also welcoming them in, like for instance the shared libraries that the Dominicans have with some of the Muslims in different places. That really allows them to show who they are as people, as Christians. And I think that that's kind of an important route to say. They're not necessarily just tossing aside that intellect. It's really another way of preaching the gospel, even if it's more silent.
It's only 5 books down, but I'm still looking forward to reading this one.
Yeah, me too, actually. Yeah.
It's one of the most beautiful books I think I've ever owned. And it's Maria Therese Hannah. And I was flipping, and I haven't read it yet, but I was flipping through it and thinking, oh, okay. And then I got some pictures and I thought, pictures are good. I like pictures. And then in the back, it's all Aramaic. And it's a fascinatingly beautiful book. And I can't wait to read her story. But yeah.
I remember right from our reading, she was in Mosul, Iraq, and I was
at the
in the
same
same
time.
province at the same time she was. So
Okay.
Yeah, we're contemporaries of each other. And
you were in the same place, actually. You've been
wow.
yeah.
didn't mean to divert you. I was
no,
just curious.
That's good discussion. I think that
and that's kind of, I mean, that's kind of on our talking point, though, is just that the fact that there is a blend of that value for the contemplative part of the tradition as well as the academic intellectual part, which, like I said, synergizes really well, at least with the Anglican tradition.
Yeah.
But yeah, and then as far as what kind of constitutes the Dominican life, there's a few kind of big pillars that are kind of the focus of, at least in the, well, I think in general, the Roman side and the Anglican side, but probably the most obvious one is study, because that's kind of what they're most known for.
Yeah.
And our specific expectation as Anglican Dominicans is we're supposed to be doing an hour of studying a day, in addition to some of our other like religious obligations.
Prayer is a huge one as well.
Praying the hours to the best we can. So morning and evening at a minimum, recommended noon, and compline if we can. But
and also prayer, we had mentioned briefly, St. Dominic had the 9 ways of prayer, which if anyone has the time to go look that up, that's really quite fascinating, kind of how he broke prayer down. But also we've talked a lot, and this is a point I just want to mention because I think it's important, about how some of us are really great at prayer and how some of us don't feel great at prayer. And I always like to mention that just because I think that a lot of people have this expectation that prayer is supposed to be easy, that it's easy to get in the mindset of, I'm going to pray. And, it's definitely nice to have, prayers out of a book that we can read and prayers that we can read together. But when it comes to really praying by ourselves and praying for ourselves and for others, that can be difficult. And it's something that I have discussed, and a couple of other people in our postulancy has discussed from time to time, of prayer is not always the easiest thing to do. It can be really hard. Sometimes you just sit there and are like, I have no idea what to pray about, or what more can I say? And as Christians in general, I think that that's something that we can all practice, but we can also, like some of the Dominicans, prayer doesn't always have to be words that we speak or words that we hear in our head or thoughts. It can be, there's famous composers that are Dominicans who their prayer and their spiritual time with Christ is in composing their music or playing their music. There's artists who are Dominicans who that's kind of the way that they center themselves and are able to pray. And so prayer can be a lot of different things, and we have a lot of different tools to ground ourselves in getting better at prayer.
And I think there's, in a lot of our readings, there's definitely a value for different kinds of prayer. The kind of the prayers we have out of the liturgy, we've got this beautiful long tradition that we can engage in, and we've got this commonality with other Christians across time and space. But then there's value for our individual contemplative prayer, which can occur on different levels, and it can be actual conversation, like Ash was saying. It can be just kind of coexisting in a space free of distraction, trying to get in touch with God in that sense. There's aspects where interacting with kind of the beauty in the world and nature are part of prayer. And then probably the other thing the Dominicans are kind of famous for is their connection to the Rosary, because at least apocryphally, the story goes all the way back to Dominic having a real value for Mary. And there's some stories that can't be validated, when they're true or not. And there's some kind of cloudiness about when and exactly and how the Rosary was prayed in a specific way. And there's a little bit of an evolution, but the Dominicans have always been tied to the Rosary and Marian devotion. And there's a place in that kind of prayer too, where those repetitive prayers can be kind of almost like a mantra, and can be kind of centering in their own way to allow people to kind of connect with the divine, just because it does give you something to that's kind of rote and mantra-like, to kind of open your mind to some other experiences.
And something you've said before, actually, that we've talked about this, is the great thing about the Rosary is, it might take you a little bit to memorize it, but once you have it down, it gives you the time and the space to think about Christ's life and the different mysteries. And after a while, you don't necessarily need to say those things out loud or to even form them in your head. It just becomes natural and something that you just do, and you're able to have that connection with. So.
And you two are still leading the rosary services there at the church in the city?
We did it for Advent.
Advent.
We weren't able to get it set up for Lent, but hopefully we're looking to start working with Father Lentz here to continue doing rosary on a regular basis. So
just curious.
Yeah.
But it's something we would like to continue. We have a value for. We've been doing a little bit a lesson with each one too.
Mm-hmm.
But
I always like talking about the rosary just because I think it can be something that, this might be going too far, is very vilified in praying and whatnot. But I mean, at least when I was growing up in the church tradition that I was growing up, it wasn't very a thing that you do or that you should do. And despite that, it's one of the best ways that I can help get myself into prayer, into a place where I can kind of converse with Christ, and it helps me in a really great way. And so I like to tell people to be open to that.
It could definitely be a valuable part of your prayer life, even though if you don't grow up with it and it's not part of your faith tradition, it is worth giving a chance to and learning about a little bit more in context. But
community is then another pillar of the Dominican lifestyle, and there's not much to say about that, but again, it's democratic. It's every person has a say,
and because it's not full-time, like kind of it would traditionally be practiced, there is still a community. People, the Anglican Dominicans meet regularly, ideally annually. They check in. There's a hierarchy of people that they report to. They engage with each other, but most of us have full-time jobs and full-time lives. But there is a community. It's just we don't get to live in community, even though they have said that they've left that open for a possibility for full-time orders to develop, but that just hasn't happened yet.
Yeah, and we were actually lucky enough to join in with the order in our region last weekend, so that was very nice to be able to see other Dominicans. There's not a lot. There's not a lot our age, which is nice to be able to kind of bridge that gap there. But there's definitely a strong sense of community and helping each other out.
That kind of segues that, preaching and ministry is a big part of your responsibility as a Dominican, and it's something we're supposed to engage in. We're doing that study so that we can minister. And there are some vows that are kind of central to your life as an Anglican Dominican. We're not full-time, so we can't commit ourselves to extreme poverty and extreme celibacy and some of those things like they have done traditionally. But within the Anglican order, we have vows of simplicity, purity, and obedience that are in congruence with the rule of St. Augustine, but are kind of adapted for more of a part-time life. The first one, simplicity, is really just living modestly and moderately, not consuming or trying to hoard wealth, and making sure that we're kind of living within our means and not making materialism a big part of our life, and then hopefully giving some of that excess that we have to worthy causes and people that need it.
Mm-hmm. And then in terms of obedience, being open to the different callings that we might have. Something that I mentioned before in some of my sermons is we all have a job for the church, no matter how big or how small. And once you join the order, you also have a job. And just being open to going with your callings and being open to accepting them without I guess any.
Well, and it's easier because it's democratic at its core.
Yeah.
I guess it's easier to, there is definitely an obedience and a hierarchy to it as well. That's kind of interwoven with that, the democratic elements. And then the final one is purity is the other part of the big vow, which, doesn't end up being celibacy for in this context, but it does kind of infuse the way you interact with people, in a way where you're not using them as a means to an end, or so for most people that the context of that is going to be kind of a marriage, relationships only, or something along those lines, just to make sure we're having the proper relationships with other people that aren't consumptive or um, harmful in any way like that.
Other than that, I guess we can talk a little bit about why we want to become Dominicans. I will speak first, I guess. I'll throw you in the spotlight. But one of the things that draws me to the Anglican Order of Preachers is being one, preaching and ministry. I was able, like I said, to introduce myself to the house that's in our region. And I was telling them how really one of my goals in life is to reach out more to younger Christians, and really, like I said, bridging that gap, showing that we all have the same struggle, while also recognizing that in the past, we, especially in the US, especially with evangelical Christianity and whatnot, may have set up a harmful or traumatic events in young people's life that have turned them away from Christianity. And so how can we draw them back in? But also being open to minority communities, being open to the LGBTQ community. How can we show them that, love is here and abundant in Christianity for them to have a place? And so that's something that I'm really passionate about in my future in ministry and whatnot, is really just reaching out to those people who may have lost faith or lost hope in the idea that a church is a safe space. And so that's what draws me in, as well as having that community. It's great to have other Dominicans who also feel that way and who also want to foster an environment where people aren't afraid of being a Christian or of talking to Christians, being welcoming and open to having discussion and dialogue.
Yeah, and the thing that appeals to me is I really like that they've found a way to allow this tradition of a religious order to kind of continue and affect more people's lives in kind of the way they've got it structured, where there's the range of commitment from full-time to ways to kind of make it a part of your daily life part-time. In the Dominican specifically, it's always really appealed to me. I do like the fact that there is, a very prayerful, contemplative, even mystical and spiritual aspect sometimes that's really harmonized with one that really values education and reason, and a pretty broad spectrum education too, that they're able to harmonize those two things, because often that kind of gets neglected in our society, and the process to become one is fairly simple, even though as we've seen, it's pretty time consuming. You spend your first year, you usually apply, get in contact with them, and then you'll start in the fall, like we did in the first year,
learning about St. Dominic, learning about the history of the order, other famous Dominicans.
And that's your novice year.
That's your
postulants year, and then after that year, then you'll transition to the postulancy year.
No, novitiate.
Novitiate, which is about 2 years long, minimum. Really, it can be longer.
And that is where you do make your first vows to live in simplicity, purity, and obedience. And so that's kind of a stepping stone into making even your life professions from then.
Yeah, and there's a couple, there's a lot of Dominicans we've read about that we thought lived kind of admirable lives. We mentioned Fra Angelico, who was kind of an incredible artist talked about Thomas Aquinas, who's kind of one of the leading intellectual figures in Europe. And then for us personally, we both really thought that Martin de Porres and Bartholomew de las Casas were two people that really resonated with us.
Mm-hmm.
You want to talk about those two really briefly?
Yeah, Martin de Porres specifically, who's out of Peru. He, I guess, was definitely, both of us were drawn to him just in his immense selflessness. He completely lived for other people and uplifting other people and helping other people. And I think one of my favorite stories is, well, one, he actually didn't want to become a Dominican right away. He wanted to earn his place as a Dominican. So he did that, even though I think that, I might be speaking for them, but they were kind of like, oh, that's a little insane to do, but okay, you go ahead and do it. But one of my favorite stories outside of that is when he was a part of the order, his specialty, aside from just taking care of people in general, was actually caring for them for medical needs. And there was at one point where he found someone who was in dire need, and he brought him in and gave him his bed. And the Dominican in charge was kind of like, what are you doing? You brought him in and gave him your space. And for me, that was a huge moment, just showing his utter selflessness, how even above himself, he was willing to give someone everything he had, which was nothing but the bed he was sleeping in order to get them well and on their feet.
And the great thing about both him and De las Casas is that they were very much on the right side of history. Martin de Porres also was in a society that was obviously had some pretty intense racial stratification. And he was just incredibly humble and forgiving, given how at times he was treated like put in a pretty second class status, which really did not seem to affect his ability to kind of love other people and just be really humble when he was being treated unfairly at times, and was witnessing people in his community being treated unfairly.
And then with De las Casas, some of you might have heard of him just because he was very well known to come over with some of the Spanish colonialists. And basically, he realized what was happening to the Native Americans was wrong. And he really spoke up against some of the bad practices that were taking place in order to actually convert them. He knew that it wasn't the proper way to do it. And so he was very vocal about, as a Dominican and with his order, about just the injustices that were taking place.
And at a time when that encomienda system was extremely brutal and violent and practically slavery, he was one of the first ones, and especially he came from a noble family, but he advocated both in the New World and went back to Spain to argue on behalf of the natives. And then by the end of his life, he was a pretty aggressive advocate for the abolition of African slavery as well.
Which, something I'll point out just in case someone brings it up while they're talking about it. And he definitely played a role in slavery that he was not proud of by the end of his life. And I think that something that I admire about him was his ability to be humble and recognize the role he played, and to, again, at the end of his life, try and correct that and to make people realize what a terrible system it was, whether it was with the Native Americans or with the Africans too. So
it's not that he was a slaveholder or anything. His primary concern initially was for the natives, and he was very, well, I shouldn't say very, but he was thought that slavery might be a better system. And I think his idea of the people that he was concerned with and the idea of who that exploitive system harming just grew bigger and bigger in time, so that he went from just kind of purely native advocacy, kind of ignoring slavery, to actually speaking out against slavery as well.
But yeah, so that's kind of, not to just end it, that's kind of where we are though with the Anglican order of preachers and Dominicans. There's probably 10 more that we could speak to that have definitely been defining in our studies of making us feel like we're on the right path and that we would like to continue to go down that path. So we're just hoping that by doing this, by having people hear about it, by letting people know about the Anglican Order of Preachers, that we'll just all reach a better understanding of, you know, there's lots of different ways to work and serve in the church. There's lots of different ways to work and serve for Christ and to spread the message of the gospel. And I just think that that's an important thing to get across. And it's one of the reasons why it's so important to me too, as well as just we have this idea of religious orders dying off and whatnot, and I think that they're very valuable, and I think that there's a lot of humbleness and a lot of worth in them to help be supportive for the church, because aside from doing our own ministry, we can really help the churches, the Episcopal Church, anyone in the Anglican communion to, I guess, be an intermediate for churches that don't have priests or who don't have anyone right now, especially with the decline in people going to church and the decline of people pursuing holy orders. It's nice to know that we have a community that is willing and able to kind of step in and help fill some of those roles.
Right here. You can't because it's live.
Gotta mute it. Sorry, that's my sister.
But that,
Oh, okay.
that kind of concludes our presentation, and we can try and answer any questions if anybody has some.
Yeah.
Which,
Yeah. So ask away if you have anything that you'd like to say, or feel free. People can also write in the comments once this is posted online and continue the conversation with us if they would like to.
and we kind of answered some along the way, so.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
All right.
that's that.
If you had to summarize in like each one of you summarize in just like a couple of sentences, what is it that you hope to accomplish as a Dominican?
Well, for me, I really like that it is keeping an important part of the Christian tradition alive, that I can participate in it, and then as someone who's kind of new to mainstream Christianity, I'm expecting to kind of learn a lot and develop a lot on both sides of that contemplative and academic side, and then maybe use that background to, kind of be able to kind of spread that to other people through teaching predominantly.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think I kind of answered this a little. I think that my joining the Dominicans to me is having a community that will back me up and help be supportive for reaching out to other communities who maybe don't feel like church is a place for them. So stepping outside of the church and going straight to them to teach them about the gospel and to have an open and loving community for them. And I say it all the time, but Nick is like the brains of the thing, and I'm just oh yeah, tell me about that. I'll go find someone to talk to it about. So as a pair, we make a really good pair in terms of asking each other best ways to talk to people about it, or what things we should study to talk to people about it. So it's kind of nice that we're able to pursue it together as well.
Absolutely. Well, thank you all for doing this tonight. I certainly appreciate it, because I know I did a lot of reading, but I learned a lot tonight. So I really do appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you.